A tournament director who has watched Carlos Alcaraz walk through these gates, who has watched Iga Swiatek warm up on that back court like it was any other Tuesday. A man who has spent years standing courtside while the biggest names in the sport turned Cincinnati into just another stop on the calendar. He has seen it all. Every kind of crowd. Every kind of demand. But he had never seen this. Not for a 21-year-old. Not for a player who, 12 months ago, most casual fans couldn't have picked out of a lineup. Not for someone sitting outside the top 15 in the world, with no Grand Slam trophy, no Nike billboard on Fifth Avenue, no decade of hype behind her name. Stay with me. Somewhere between a semi-final high and a first-round nerve, there's a version of Alex Eala that nobody photographs. The one icing an ankle at 2 in the morning in a Toronto hotel room, phone face down, lights off, because tomorrow there's a plane to catch, and a whole country's expectations riding in the overhead bin with her. She doesn't post that part. There's no reel of it, no caption, no soft lighting. She just does it, quietly, alone, and shows up the next day looking like nothing happened at all. That's the part people miss when they talk about the ticket rush. They see the sold-out sections. They see the flags in the crowd and the lines wrapping around the ticket booth. They don't see the ice bag. They don't see the 20-year-old body absorbing a schedule that would break most professionals twice her age. Mason, Ohio doesn't usually feel like this in August. The Lindner Family Tennis Center is the kind of venue that hums along politely good tennis, good crowds, a steady, familiar rhythm that rarely breaks. It's one of the oldest professional tournaments still played in its original city, which is another way of saying it has seen everything before. Champions have come through these gates for over a century. Nothing here is supposed to surprise anyone anymore. Until this year. Because the moment Alex Eala's name went up on the schedule board, something shifted. And it didn't shift slowly. It shifted immediately. Tickets that should have taken days to move were gone within hours. Fans weren't just buying seats, they were organizing entire trips around a single name on a draw sheet. From Ohio, sure, that part made sense. But also from California. From New York. People driving across state lines, booking hotel rooms, rearranging work schedules, all for a second-round match in the middle of August, months before anyone thought this player would matter this much. Somewhere in a back office at the Lindner Center, a tournament director was staring at a sales dashboard that simply didn't make sense to him. Bob Moran has run this event long enough to know exactly what normal demand looks like. He's watched Aryna Sabalenka fill a stadium on reputation alone. He's watched Iga Swiatek move the needle just by walking onto a practice court. What he was looking at now didn't fit any of those patterns. This was a player ranked outside the top 15, generating the kind of instant, explosive interest usually reserved for a world number 1 on a Grand Slam final Sunday. He didn't have a clean explanation for it. He just had a word for it. Unbelievable, he called it, and coming from a man who has spent his career managing exactly this kind of chaos, that word carried weight. And here's the thing. This wasn't even the first time it had happened. 3 weeks earlier, in Toronto, the exact same scene played out. Tickets for her second-round match disappeared within minutes of the draw going up. Organizers scrambled and moved her off a side court and onto center not because the schedule called for it, but because the demand simply forced their hand. She played that main court 3 times in a row. Sold out, every single time, in a tournament stacked with bigger names and bigger reputations. Tournament director Carl Hale said something quietly remarkable after that week. In all his years running the event, he could barely remember a player ranked outside the top 5 moving tickets like this. Outside the top 5. And Eala wasn't anywhere close to that number. She was doing it from a ranking that, on paper, shouldn't have registered this kind of pull at all. Former British number 1 Greg Rusedski watched the whole thing unfold from a distance and reached for the only comparison that felt honest to him, Serena Williams. Not for the game, not for the trophies, but for the gravity. The way an entire crowd seems to bend itself around one single name on a schedule. And then Andy Roddick. A man who has watched tennis search for its next crossover star for 2 decades without much luck, said the quiet part out loud. If a player can pull an audience that size out of nowhere, that isn't a threat to the sport. That is the single best thing that can happen to it. So what is actually happening here? Rewind, compress, watch how fast this climbed. Because the speed of it is the part that still doesn't fully make sense. A junior Grand Slam title in 2022, the first Filipino player, male or female, to ever win one. A run to the Miami Open semifinals in 2025 that ended in defeat, but not before she'd beaten 3 separate Grand Slam champions along the way, Eala-Mania among them, on courts where nobody expected her name to survive round 1. Then 2026, and the history kept coming. The first Filipina to win a Grand Slam main draw match at the US Open. Then Washington, and a first 2-tour singles title, won by beating world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final in front of a crowd that had shown up for someone else and left having watched a new one arrive. Then Toronto, a 4th-round run, the deepest of her career at that level, 20 years old. A career-high ranking of number 20 in the world, climbing fast enough that the rankings site could barely keep pace with the updates. 8 matches. Roughly 12 days. 2 major tournaments, back-to-back. Almost no real gap between them. That's not a rise. That's a body absorbing damage in real time, week after week with no room built in to recover. And it caught up with her. A minor ankle scare in Toronto, nothing catastrophic, nothing that made headlines for long, but enough that she had to stop, reassess, and make a call most 20-year-olds chasing this kind of momentum are terrified to make. She pulled back, took a couple of days completely off tennis, stepped away from practice courts and press requests, saw friends, let her body reset before Cincinnati even began. No press conference moment. No dramatic statement about resilience. Just silence, rest, and the quiet, unglamorous discipline of knowing exactly when to stop pushing. Here's the part that doesn't get said enough. That pause is precisely why the rest of this run has even been possible. A player pushing through 8 matches in 12 days with no reset doesn't earn a career high seed. She earns an injury that quietly ends her season and gets talked about in the past tense by October. Eala's willingness to stop, to protect the body instead of chasing one more headline, is the reason she walked into Cincinnati as the 17th seed, the highest of her career at any BJ 1000 event. The setback didn't slow the story down. In a strange, almost backwards way, it's the exact reason the story is still being written at all. That 17 seed isn't just a number tucked into a bracket. In a 96-player draw, the top 32 seeds receive a bye straight into round 2, skipping the chaos of the opening round entirely and gaining an extra day to adjust to the courts, the heat, and the noise. Her opening opponent will be the winner of a first-round match between Romania's Elena Gabriela Ruse and Poland's Magdalena Furch. And waiting somewhere further down that draw, depending on how the bracket breaks, sit Sabalenka, Rybakina, Pegula, Goff, and Witek. Every single one of them a possible collision course, and every one of them a genuine measuring stick for exactly how far this run can go. But rewind again, because the real story here isn't the seeding chart. It's what's happening in the stands around it. Her matches have stopped being just tennis matches. They've become something closer to a gathering. Flags in the crowd, chants that have nothing to do with traditional tennis etiquette and everything to do with pride. Families who flew in not simply to watch a sport, but to watch someone who looks like them, sounds like them, carries the same last name cadence, competing on a stage that rarely made room for that before this year. One thing keeps getting said about her, by analysts and by fellow players alike. Danielle Collins has spoken about how genuinely comfortable Eala seems in her own skin, how natural she looks under a level of pressure that would visibly rattle players with twice her experience. That's not something a marketing team can manufacture. That's something a crowd simply feels the moment they see it. And that feeling travels. It's why Filipino communities that have never organized around a tennis player before in their lives are now driving hours, flying across the country, packing arenas in cities where their national sport barely registers on a local sports page. This isn't really about tennis anymore. Not entirely. It's about the specific, universal ache of watching someone from your corner of the world finally get put on the biggest stage available to them and refuse to shrink from it once she's there. Because underneath all of it is a feeling almost everyone understands instantly, whether they've ever picked up a racket or not. The feeling of being overlooked by name, of being good enough for years before anyone outside your own community bothered to notice. Eala isn't new. She's 21, and she started at 4 years old, hitting balls against a wall long before anyone outside her family thought it mattered. What's new is simply that the rest of the world is finally paying attention. And even with all of this, it's worth saying plainly, this is still the floor, not the ceiling. A 20-year-old ranked 20 in the world, sitting on a 17 seed, with a Grand Slam beginning in New York on August 30th. If Cincinnati goes the way the last month has gone, she doesn't just walk into the US Open under the radar. She walks in as a name every seed above her has to genuinely think about before they step on court. A first UTA 1000 semifinal is not far off from where she stands right now. A top 10 ranking, given this trajectory, feels less like a hope and more like a matter of when, not if. And somewhere down the line, a Grand Slam final with a Filipino flag rippling in the stands stops being a hopeful, slightly unrealistic headline and starts becoming a realistic Tuesday afternoon. None of that has happened yet. That's exactly what makes it unbearable to wait for. So think back to that dashboard. Back to a tournament director who has watched the biggest names in the sport walk through his gates for years, staring at numbers he genuinely couldn't explain. He wasn't stunned because a star showed up in Cincinnati. He was stunned because he was watching one get built, in real time, in front of him, and the tickets had already sold out before he even had the chance to call it that. Tell me, where were you the first time you heard the name Alex Eala? Was it Washington? Was it Toronto? Or is this the first time it's actually stuck? In a few years, when everyone knows this name, you'll want a record of when you knew first.